In the Middle East, the Gulf countries warned that a regional conflict could threaten their interests. In Brazil, the landless workers' movement reoccupied a public land to demand advances in agrarian reform. And in the United States, the criminal trial against former President Donald Trump began Monday in New York. Hello and welcome to From the South. I'm Alejandra Garcia from teleSUR Studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In the Middle East, the Gulf countries warned that a regional conflict could threaten their interests. The Persian Gulf countries are pushing for Israel and Iran to find a peaceful solution to their conflict, which escalated after Tehran's defensive response to the Tel Aviv attacks. According to sources, these countries have held talks with Israel to get it not to retaliate against Iran after the attack. The Gulf countries are trading allies that plan to strengthen exports mainly of hydrocarbons in the region and fear that a conflict in the Middle East could hinder their hopes. This is because 46% of the world's oil production flows through important commercial sea routes in the region, such as the Strait of Hormuz. The Supreme National Security Council of Iran reiterated on Monday that any aggression by the Zionist occupier will be met with a strategy 10 times greater than that of April 14. The Iranian entity affirmed that the Operation True Promise is a legal and legitimate action protected by the United Nations Charter. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps also pointed out that it informed several countries and governments, including the United States, well in advance. This version was confirmed by officials from the Pentagon and the Turkish Foreign Ministry, who acted as mediators between Washington and Tehran. Reiterating that the operation was successful, Iran reaffirmed its readiness for any scenario that might arise. Iran opened on Monday the Khamenei and Mehrabad airports located in its capital, Tehran. Operations at Mehrabad Airport started at 5:30 a.m. local time, and half an hour later they were reactivated at the Imam Khamenei. The activities started amid restrictions imposed on Sunday after the execution of the True Promise mission in response to Israel's aggression against Persian interests and officials. The Caribbean Community CARICOM insisted Monday on avoiding destabilization in the Middle East and protecting world peace in the face of worsening conflict with Iran's response to Israel's bombing of the consulate in Syria. A communique from the Council of Foreign Relations of the bloc regretted the latest events in the area, called for an urgent action by the international community, and emphasized the consequences of military incursions for the security of the entire world. CARICOM demanded the immediate cessation of hostilities between Iran and Israel and requested both parties to refrain from taking further steps to exacerbate tensions and to adhere to dialogue to solve the differences. It also called to work for the end of the conflict and bring humanitarian assistance to the victims. Israeli occupation troops fired on hundreds of Palestinians moving from Rafah, north of Gaza. After spreading rumors about the opening of the coastal road to Al-Rashed, the occupation forces fired on women, child, and elderly people moving in that direction. The Zionists allowed them to advance to one of their checkpoints, where they opened fire, forcing them to retreat. Many claimed in the media and social networks that they are tired and humiliated by the situation in Rafah and that they are threatened daily with a large-scale military operation. In Palestine, more than 700,000 civilians face a health crisis due to environmental pollution that has reached unprecedented levels in the northern Gaza Strip. The government media office in Gaza indicated that the health and environmental crisis is generated by the waste and rubble left behind by the constant Israeli bombardments. It also warned that the bodies of thousands of martyrs decomposing under the rubble constitute a serious health and environmental hazard. The entity indicated that these damages are also leading to spread of infectious diseases in thousands of citizens. The World Health Organization condemns the Israeli regime for limiting access and delaying humanitarian missions in the Gaza Strip on its social network accounts. The health agency called for clearer security warranties as well as a functional conflict resolution mechanism and predictable and accelerated movement through checkpoints to ensure humanitarian access to the Gazan population and to support the restoration of the health system. The health agency denounced that the obstacles they constantly face in carrying out their work to bring relief to those affected by the Israeli continuous military aggressions. Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back. In Brazil, the landless workers' movement reoccupied a public land to demand advances in the agrarian reform contemplated in the program of President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva's government. This action is part of the National April of Struggles Day carried out by the landless workers' movement every year to remember the 21 people murdered by the Pará State Military Police in 1996. This year, 2024, the slogan of the day is "Occupy to Feed Brazil" and seeks to pressure the federal government to advance with the agrarian reform in the country. They also denounce the actions of intimidation by the military police of Rio de Janeiro against the farmers and demand a larger budget for the area, as well as the deregulation of farmers' access to credit and to public policies. The President of Brazil, Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, presented on Monday the Land of the People program for the agrarian reform. The initiative was unveiled during a ceremony at the Planalto Palace and seeks to establish a new strategy to expand access to land, aiming to solve the situation of the thousands of families that need to be settled. According to Brazil's Minister of Agrarian Development, Paulo Teixeira, it is expected that 295,000 farming families will be benefited by 2026. Teixeira also emphasized that the program seeks to bring peace to the countryside amidst a series of occupations promoted by the landless movement throughout the country in this Red April. Pope Francis has expressed his support to the farmers of the community of San Juan Bautista de Catacaos in the north of Peru. In a message broadcast by the Archbishop of Lima, the pontiff called on farmers to defend their land and prevent dispossession. Part of his communication was directed to the blessing he gave in honor of them, to whom he asked to continue their struggle. This support is Francis' response to the denunciations presented by the farmers last year at the Vatican. There, they explained that the companies associated with the group Soda Lithium Christiane Vitae had tried to evict them from their land.
The members of the farmer community of Pura, I know what happened to you. Defend the land, don't let it be stolen. Thank you for what you are doing. I pray for you from here, and I am close to you, and I gladly give you my blessing. God bless the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And please do not forget to pray for me. Courage and go ahead.
The delegation of the Colombian government in talks with the National Liberation Army, ELN, confirmed on Sunday the beginning of an extraordinary round of dialogues in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela. The initiative was proposed by the guerrilla group, considering that the peace process is going through a critical stage. The meeting began on Saturday and will last until April 22nd. They also confirmed that on Friday the parties held meetings with the representatives of the war-torn and accompanying countries. The ceasefire and territorial transformations will be some of the issues to be addressed in this round, to which the Colombian president made reference. The government of President Gustavo Petro is promoting a policy of total peace through the establishment of dialogue tables with various illegal armed groups.
Now we have conversations with the ELN, with problems because that is not easy. And as president, I have to say it, I want to guarantee that this negotiation table with the ELN is preserved, and that it advances to a negotiation or the definitive decision to stop the violence with all the requirements that this implies.
In an exclusive interview for our multi-platform teleSUR, Grenada's Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell recognized the importance of strengthening multilateralism and solidarity to face the challenges of today.
More than ever, I think within CARICOM, between Cuba and CARICOM, the wider region, we recognize we need to reinforce multilateralism. We need to reinforce diplomatic conversations with each other. We need to reinforce our solidarity because the challenges we face, in many instances, are not of our own doing. They're external to us, whether it's wars, economic shocks, the climate issues that we all face, the climate crisis issues. So we do recognize that we have to, in fact, remain more united. We need to remain closer with each other to foster solidarity, to make sure we can find common solutions to the challenges that we face.
The Prime Minister highlighted the importance also of the peoples of the region to know each other and the role media like teleSUR play to achieve this.
When our citizens visit the islands or the countries within the region, we get a greater understanding of what unites us, and it makes it easier, therefore, for governments to work in our collective interests. So it's not just about at the leadership level, but it's also important for it to happen at the people level. And I think a program like yours is a good way of doing so. Oftentimes we underestimate the importance of the media in teaching each other about each other. And obviously when we do that, it makes it easier for our people to understand that we are more similar rather than dissimilar, that we face common challenges, and that we can help each other. So certainly in the case of Cuba, for example, cultural exchanges, I think between our citizens, whether it's music, art, sport, these things help quite a lot.
We have a final short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience, you can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with teleSUR. Final short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In the United States, the criminal trial against former President Donald Trump began Monday in New York in the middle of the election campaign in which the Republican aspires to return to the White House. New York prosecutors in this trial have charged Trump with 34 counts related to falsifying financial reports to cover up hush payments from a porn star in 2016 and two others. These are considered serious crimes because they were part of a scheme to conceal information damaging to the candidate from voters. The charges carry a penalty of up to 4 years in prison. However, it seems that if he is convicted, he will not be sentenced to prison. Trump is managing to turn the trial into a political show for the benefit of his campaign. And if he wins, as some polls indicate, he could be the first convicted felon to lead the White House. Former U.S. President Donald Trump offered some statements to reporters outside the courtroom ahead of his landmark New York criminal trial.
This is political persecution. This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And again, it's a case that should have never been brought. It's an assault on America. Before There's never been anything like it. Every legal scholar said this case is nonsense. It should never have been brought. It doesn't deserve anything like this. There is no case, and they've said it. People that don't necessarily follow or like Donald Trump said this is an outrage that this case was brought.
Mixed protests were heard outside a New York courthouse on Monday. Protesters chanted, "No one is above the law," and supporters shouted, "USA, USA, USA." This is the first criminal trial of a former U.S. president and the first of 4 indictments against Trump. The former president has managed to delay the other 3 criminal trials pending against him with all sorts of legal maneuvers. This is considered the least damaging to his candidacy, although it is the only one that is being processed before the elections. Dozens of people are expected to summoned to the courtroom to begin the process of finding 12 jurors in addition to 6 alternates. In Niger, citizens rallied demanding that the governing board immediately expel U.S. troops from the territory, as happened with the French troops after the Nigerian government put an end to the agreement that allowed the presence of Washington's armed forces. The citizens demanded their immediate withdrawal. Protesters further reaffirmed that the era of empires and colonies was over. Niamey had signed an agreement allowing the presence of 1,000 Pentagon soldiers, which was dissolved by the governing board that has opted for a military exchange with Russia. Niger continues to expel any Western remnants and richest million-dollar oil deal with China. 3 agreements were signed in Niamey, the country's capital, by the Nigerian Prime Minister Ali Lamine Seyne and the general manager of the Chinese state oil company CNPC, Zhou Sucoin. They are included in an advance of $400 million paid by the Chinese company at an interest rate of 7%. The agreement provides for a memorandum of understanding and a joint crude oil marketing contract. The Nigerian premier welcomed his country's cooperation with Beijing and criticized previous governments for mortgaging the country to enemy powers. On Monday, the war in Sudan reaches its first year. The conflict between the army and paramilitary forces has left over 15,000 deaths and 25 million people dependent on humanitarian aid. After several months of tensions between the rapid support forces and the army for the Vatican power after the COP of 2019, heavy fighting broke out and today there are 10 million displaced people. Humanitarian organizations have also denounced massacres committed in Darfur, more than 19 million children without schools, and an increase in the number of violence of sexual crimes, including those committed against children. Despite international efforts, peace in that North African nation does not look like a possibility in the short term. The United Nations stated that Sudan is facing the world's worst humanitarian crisis after a year of armed conflict between the rapid support forces and the army. According to the latest United Nations reports, the conflict has left almost 15,000 people dead, at least 8 million civilians displaced, and 25 million Sudanese in urgent need of humanitarian aid. Humanitarian workers denounced the blocking of international aid, rising levels of famine, and human rights violations. According to the World Food Programme, the states most vulnerable and affected by the crisis are West Kordofan, South Kordofan, Blue Nile, and it's spreading to other areas in the African region. In this context, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres calls for support to the Sudanese in their effort to emerge from the conflict and to urgently increase humanitarian aid. Also, through the International Humanitarian Conference for Sudan and its neighbors, the United Nations representative described the situation faced by the Sudanese as a nightmare following the bloodshed, sexual violence, and destruction of their infrastructures. Guterres called for more support for donors, contributions, the protection of civilians, and guarantees for full humanitarian access in the African country. Each year on April 15th, World Art Day celebrations are held to reinforce the links between artistic creations and society, encourage greater awareness and highlight the contribution of artists to sustainable development. The first World Art Day was celebrated in 2012 when it was started by the International Arts Association, III, with the idea of promoting awareness about creative activity all over the globe. The organization proposed April 15th birthday of Leonardo da Vinci and was approved by more than 150 artists as well as all of the members' committees. World Art Day continues to be supported and promoted by UNESCO. This World Art Day is a timely reminder that art can unite and connect us even in the most difficult circumstances. And we have come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net and join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For Telesur English, I'm Alejandra Garcia. Thank you for watching.